Good to go? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so welcome everybody to the Climate Emergency Sustainable and Scrutiny panel today. And welcome to people who are watching on YouTube, because as you've gathered, we're operating as a virtual meeting today. So if I read out the statement that due to the ongoing COVID situation and desire to retain a level of social distancing at council meetings at this time, we are holding this meeting virtually. We will review this approach for any future meetings in line with government and health guidance at this time. So we're going to try first time in chair, so you'll have to be kind to me, and we'll hopefully manage to time as best we can. As usual, we're going to try and restrict panel members to 2 questions to start off with, and then if time is in our favour, we might try and squeeze in some bonus questions if we've got time to do that. Okay, so item 2, apologies for absence and substitutions. Michaela, do you take us through that?
Yeah, apologies from the Chair, Councillor Karen Walker. And also we currently have a Lib Dem vacancy on the panel, which is being filled at this meeting by Councillor Hal McPhee.
Okay, thank you very much and welcome, Hal. In terms of declarations of interest, are there any declarations that people would like to make at this stage? No, and as usual, if something occurs to you as the meeting progresses, oh, Grant.
I'm not sure if I have to declare it, but I do rent a Curo garage. I'm not sure it's really an interest, but just in case, yeah. Okay,
noted. And if we need to follow that up at some point, I'm sure Michaela and the team will do that. Thank you. And if anyone else, something occurs as we're going through, then do feel free to pipe up and declare it if it occurs. Okay, and if we move on to item 4, urgent business agreed by the chair. As I understand it, there is no urgent business. So we'll move straight on to item 5, statements from the public and from councillors. So I think we've got Guy Hodgson in the room. I think Guy will open up the floor to you in a minute. I think you'll have 3 minutes and the panel will have an opportunity to ask you some factual questions afterwards. So the floor is yours, Guy.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Guy Hodgson. I'm a resident of Southlands in Weston, and I'm a parent of a 6-year-old at St Mary's Primary School in Weston. I'm here today to present a petition asking for a safe crossing at St Mary's Primary School and the RUH. The petition has received 237 signatures, and these can be viewed online where full details of what is being asked for are given, and I'll provide the link in my statement. The bulk of the signatures came from parents of St Mary's, and there's clearly supports for improvements to the existing arrangements. Highways have been consulted, and the case is strong based on user counts at the school drop-off and pick-up times, and I give thanks to my ward councillors who are present for their help with that. The most likely measure would be a zebra crossing, and the cost is estimated at around £60,000. The project has not been selected as one of the 2022 transport improvement schemes. So I would therefore like to ask the panel to provide any pressure they can to see the crossing funded through the Livable Neighbourhood Scheme for Southlands. This is where many of the St Mary's pupils live, and the crossing point is also a logical desire line to connect Southlands livable neighbourhood with the existing RUH site, which in itself is a livable neighbourhood in its own right. I don't feel I need to explain to this panel why safe routes for active travel are so important. One thing this petition has shown is the prohibitive cost of providing such road crossings, and these costs come from a large part from the need to provide mains-powered beacons and extensive road markings. The Greater Manchester Combined Authority has been shouting about this problem for some time, and they've done successful trials to reduce crossing costs to under £1,000 in certain circumstances. These trials were on side roads, so not necessarily of help to my case, but there are doubtless dozens of places in Bath which could benefit from these changes in crossing requirements. So essentially, whilst I'm here, I'd like to invite the panel to support, most probably via WECA, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority in their lobbying of government. Climate emergency is urgent, and we do need cheaper ways to provide safe crossings which can be deployed at speed and at scale. And thank you for your help and having me today.
Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Guy. As I understand it, what will happen next is your petition will get passed on to the appropriate cabinet lead, which I'm guessing will be Manda Rigby, for her to respond. But if I go round the panel, is there any factual questions that anyone would like to put to Guy? I'm not seeing any indications. Thank you very much for an informative presentation. That was really helpful, and you will no doubt hear from the cabinet lead in due course.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, if we now move on to David Ridgewell. David, are you in the room?
Yes, I'm in the room. Thank you, Chair. My points today are about obviously climate change, and for most very important, but are about obviously the mainstream main way of getting around Bath and North East Somerset and the West Riding Combined Authority, as the previous speaker said, and North Somerset, which is obviously the bus network. Today, as we speak, the buses are running at 60% of their passenger figures pre the COVID-19, which obviously means that no bus in the West Riding Combined Authority or North Somerset is commercially viable. We're reliant at the moment on COVID-19 bus operator grant, which will run out in April. As Doug Clarenbold said this morning on BBC Radio Bristol, that is an intolerable situation for Stagecoach and First Group and people like Fairsaver and RAPT. Just ask the council to press the mayor, Dan Norris, to continue with Don Davis, the leader of North Somerset, because they've got the joint bus plan together, to make sure that we push this case at ministers and with the MPs, and particularly all the work that Vera's doing, particularly getting Jacob Rees-Mogg to also engage with the Prime Minister on this very serious situation. Otherwise, we will see a lot of cuts in bus services around the west of England and around Bath. On the issue of the special cabinet meeting on the 23rd, I would ask the Climate Change Committee to make sure that these corridors that we're looking at to Radstock, Midsummer, Norton and down through Pease down to Wales and Shepton Mallet, and the other corridor between Bristol and Bath. And the third corridor, of course, is the A37 coming out of Street, Wells and Glastonbury up through Farrington, Gurney, Clutton and Pensford and into Whitchurch and then into Bristol. That we make sure we've got good interchanges, high quality bus shelters and waiting areas, hubs for cycling and walking, and particularly where we're putting in cycle facilities, that we're also putting in bus lanes. I'm not a great lover of floating bus stops, nor are the disabled advisory panels I sit on. And I certainly think that on the Newbridge Road, we need to look closely. If we're going to put bus facilities in, let's put bus lanes and cycling and walking facilities in together. They seem to work quite effectively in the Bristol area. I am extremely concerned, as I think the cabinet member Sarah knows, as does Dan, the mayor, that these interchanges that were proposed by WECA at the moment, like Grand Parade to change from bus 6 and 7 from the 30th of this month onto the 3, that is not a fit for purpose interchange if you're going to the RUH or going on to the bus station. And I don't think Grand Parade is a bus facility. Certainly there's a lot of money spent on it and a lot of resources. Equally, the thing that's really got people upset at the moment along through the villages of Kelston and Weston and into Bristol is the interchange facility at Cherry Gardens, which of course is in South Gloucestershire, but is not a fit interchange facilities, change buses between Bristol and Bath via Bitton. And I know an awful lot of passengers in both directions are very concerned. It has no lighting, no real-time information, no CCTV, and we need proper standards interchanges if we're to make them fit for purpose. On the odd down park and ride, then we need to make sure that park and ride is accessible to all the buses coming in from North East Somerset. We shouldn't be spending £700,000 on a WECA contract running a park and ride bus to the city centre, when we could, of course, like Oxford or Salisbury, stop the buses coming through and save money and fill those buses up with more passengers. So we've got some work to do there, and it's equally that applies in Brislington, where we're running a shuttle bus, mostly empty, in that Bristol city centre, where we could, of
3
course,
minutes.
be running the X39 at 349 and 178. I just finally say I'm grateful to the Mayor, and he's managed to save Service 8, 178 Radstock to Bristol, and also the D2 to Salisbury, as far as Warminster with Wiltshire Council making connection. So we have had some wins, but I would obviously progress this further. And finally, my point is, can we please look at the bus station to get a travel centre reopened with Destination West to do the same thing with Bristol? So perhaps somebody engage Destination West about the future use of the bus station travel shop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. As always, it's very detailed, and always learn something new from your comments and contributions. So that's appreciated. Again, your comments, I'm not sure, did you submit them in writing as well? I'm sure your comments one way or another will be passed on to I think they go to the Sustainable Transport Lead. So that would be Sarah Warren, I think. So I'll make sure that, or the team will make sure that those are passed on. Again, if we go round the group, does anybody have any factual questions? Grant?
Thanks for that, David. I want to know, what more do you think Dan Norris can do against such high government funding cuts?
I mean, I would like to see the Mayor raise this with, obviously he's raised it with Vera in the national media, and I've seen that, and it's now been in the Mirror and it's been in the Guardian, but I would like to see the M10, I think it is, a group of Metro mayors, the Core City group, and the group of local authorities that Bath belongs to, raising this in those local authority bodies as well, and also possibly raising it with members of the House of Lords in the South West and the Transport Select Committee chair, so we don't leave any stone unturned to make sure Boris Johnson understands that £1.3 billion, the bus service improvement grant money, will be a very thin icing on the cake in southwest England.
Okay, thank you, David, and thank you, Grant. Any other questions from the panel members? No? Okay, well, as always, your contributions are very much appreciated. Thank you, David. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If we move now on to item 6, the minutes. I think the minutes have been circulated in the pack as usual. Can I confirm that these are a correct record? Do we normally, oh, thank you, Lisa. Do we normally do proposer and seconder? Yeah, and we got a seconder from Shelley. So Lisa proposing, Shelley seconding. So we'll assume those are a correct record. Thank you very much. We then move on to item 7. So we've got the luxury of lots of people here. So I think that we're now going to initially, is it Richard to initially introduce the item and then on to one of the team, Richard, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. Yeah. So shall I start?
Yeah, lovely.
Yes, well, in normal circumstances, you would have had other members of the Cabinet whose portfolios cover this panel's work here. But unfortunately, WECO have scheduled a clash meeting at the same time. So those members are unable to be here, which is why I'm here, because I wasn't supposed to cover this meeting, but never mind, I know this subject. Just by way of introduction, and then Sophie is going to follow, and we have Chris Major, I think, on the call as well with detail. I just want to remind the panel of the context for this year's budget. So lest anybody thinks that the pandemic is over and the financial impacts are over, you're wrong. They continue. They will continue next financial year as well, and quite probably the financial year after that. And the fundamental problem the council has is that its 3 principal income sources have been affected in different ways by the pandemic. So if we just go on to the next slide, I'm not sure who's controlling the slides, it's not me. Sophie, have you got control of them?
I'm not actually sure we've got slides actually at the moment.
Oh,
I
right.
wasn't able to share them, but I can share screens if someone will let me have that ability, and then I can put them on the screen and you can tell me when to change them.
Okay, well, while you're doing that, so the three principal income sources the council has, which of course we use to support our services and fund our services, are parking income. Thank you, Sophie, it's coming up. Next one, I think. Yeah, so we have three sources, parking income, and that has actually increased under the pandemic because people are, in general, abandoning the public services, the bus services, and are using private cars instead. And during the last year, we saw very strong visitors to Bath. Many people who perhaps might have gone abroad in the past tended to stay at home, and we had heavy visitor numbers. So our parking income unexpectedly is higher than we thought it was. I'll come back to those other pressures in a minute, but going down to the bottom, the Roman baths and the pump rooms, which is our principal earner in heritage, has seen restrictions on the numbers of people within those facilities, and that has led to the income being reduced. And not on that list is the council's commercial property estate, which has seen big reductions in rents paid by its tenants. We currently have in the order of £7 million of rent arrears owed by our tenants. Some tenants have gone out of business, but also looking forward, we are seeing generally a correction in the market to rental levels which are roughly 40% of those before the pandemic. And that will continue to unwind probably for another decade. So we've taken a substantial financial shock, and that remains. But the other issues on this slide, by way of background, are that during 2021, we saw a reduction in the numbers of adult and children's referrals. But we have now seen, and that's why the adult social care budget is under budget for coming up to now, but also we've seen a big increase in children's services referrals, many of which were suppressed during the pandemic. People just didn't come forward with issues. So those have created their own financial pressures. And if we go to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to do this. So I made the point that this is going to be a tough year coming up. The other underlying thing I want to mention is the inflation within the economy, which hits us unevenly, but heavily. So we are seeing strong upward pressure on wages. Members of the panel will probably realize that wages in sectors such as the care sector and in areas such as with HGV drivers and those kind of staff, there is very strong national pressure in the economy in those sectors, and we have to pay those high wages if we want to have staff working for us. But also, and this is worth highlighting, in the construction sector, we are seeing significant increases in construction costs coming through to the council. And I'm not talking about marginal increases here, substantial increases, partly driven by shortage of materials and supply chain problems, but also again by wages. And I'm afraid both of these factors are directly Brexit related, because the country has lost roughly 3 million workers over the last 2 years. And of course, that has led to labour shortages. When you have shortages, that's when demand goes up and prices go up. So we have these problems that are affecting us at the moment. No doubt in due course they will work through, but they are there for the present. Finally, just wanted to turn to the provisional settlement. So we do get money from the government, but it's no longer allocated as revenue support grant. It comes in various pots, in bits and pieces. And overall, the settlement figures were higher than we expected, to the value of 3 million. But, and you'll see in a minute, this goes nowhere near covering the gap between the income that the council has lost. So we are still continuing to lobby on that point. So if you could go to the next slide. And this is actually quite a shocking slide, because what it shows, what each of those blue bars on the chart represent a upper tier local authority from Camden right at the top, London Borough of Camden right at the top, getting spending power of £1,174 per resident, to Bath North East Somerset with £772 per resident, almost at the bottom end of the scale nationally. And when members look at our budget, as you'll do shortly, you'll see that that chronic underfunding by the government is one of the reasons we have so many financial issues to deal with in setting budgets. And that is patently unfair. The next slide shows you what would happen if we received funding at Camden's rate. It would mean that Bath North East Somerset received £77.5 million more in funding if it was placed on an equal footing with authorities at the top end, such as Camden. And that is really important, I think, that residents understand that this council is being shortchanged by the government, and that is one of the reasons that we are having to make cuts and service economies on a more or less continuous basis. We go to the next slide, and then I'm just about to hand over to Sophie. So the key figures in this slide are the top one is the budget figure that we worked off last year, the net budget figure, and the additional funding requirement on top of that this year is £18 million, which comes from a variety of pressures, such as I've just described. To bring it down to a level that the council can afford, we have had to make just under £12 million of savings and economies this year, and we'll be going on to talk about those in a minute. And that brings you back to a proposed net budget for next year of 136 million. So I think that's where I hand over to Sophie seamlessly, but be happy to take questions later on, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is just a note of a reminder of what the Section 151 officer's job is in setting a budget. So to provide assurance upon the robustness of the estimates and the adequacy of reserves. So this is the draft budget that will be going to Cabinet, and we welcome your scrutiny of the robustness of what's in there. The 5-year forward view is worth pausing on, and you've got the detail in the budget paper that was circulated to you. But as Councillor Samuel said, there was an increase in the money available to us this year, but which will reset the budget taking account of the new funding requirements. But from next year, we see this dip in the funding available. That's because of the business rates retention pilot coming to an end, or at least at the moment it is forecast to come to an end. And our income remains down next year because the Roman Baths is not forecast to have recovered from the COVID pandemic, with the loss of international tourists, etc., that comes with that. But over time, you can see the two aligning in future years. So we need to get through a current dip, which will be a challenging period, but we are forecasting an improvement over time, and that's as the council tax take from our area increases and the budget pressures, we hope, don't grow as aggressively as they have done. We're now going to have the opportunity to talk through the proposals that are within the portfolio for this panel. You are obviously able to ask questions on the rest of the savings proposals included, but these will be taken away to review separately. Across the climate and sustainable travel, neighbourhood services, transport services and planning portfolios, there is a proposal for up to about £500,000 of savings proposals and just over £1.5 million of income generation proposals. I don't know if Councillor Wood wants to come in at this point to summarise the changes that are being proposed on this slide.
No, that's fine, Sophie. I shall let you do that, but I'm here and happy to take any questions that come out, particularly for neighbourhood services.
Thank you. So the three largest ones are highlighted on this slide: a parking charges review, bringing in additional income, and increased income from the sale of recyclates and increased income from the garden waste service. But there were more increased income changes included in your pack. And then in Appendix 2 are the draft funding proposals for increased budgets for different services. And I won't go through them all there. You can take a moment to read them. But they were included in the pack. And then the final slide I have is on the capital proposals for the Climate Emergency Sustainability Panel portfolios, which were also included in the pack. The reason I'm not going through these in detail because there are quite a lot of small items. I think it may be more profitable to go now to questions and allow you to dig deeper into anything that you want to scrutinise.
Thank you. That's really helpful to Richard, Sophie, and briefly Dave as well for your contributions. Before we kick off, I just want to remind panel that we're asked to focus really on the aspects of the budget which are in the remit of the panel, and so I'll ask you to do that. To start off with, I'll restrict you to 2 questions to start off with, and we'll see how the time frame goes. If I kick off, I think Grant, I think you were first out the gate. So the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the presentation there, for clarifying some of the points. I think once again, we have a budget that doesn't appear to be that realistic or even achievable. And I would question if these savings are going to become a reality, as I think I did last year. I'm also disappointed to see further costs put onto residents living in Baines on top of council tax. The cost of living is already starting to hit families hard. So the last thing they want is to have its council hit them even harder. I also think a bit more transparency would have been beneficial to this panel, as the reports pack is very light on actual substance or background information. My first question, one of the things a lot of my residents get angry about in Poulton in particular is the garden waste collection service that is paid for by residents, once again, on top of their council tax. But then the service isn't delivered, as we saw in a big way last year. How can the council justify increases in garden waste fees when they can't even guarantee delivery of the service, especially when residents are trying to do the right thing and dispose of garden waste responsibly? I can only see this backfiring quite literally, with residents choosing to burn garden waste on bonfires, as an example. Do you want me to go on to my next question or wait for a reply, then do my next question?
Yeah, let's scoop up your second question as well, Grant.
Okay, so secondly, I see that the council intends on bringing in car parking charges to car parks in Midston Norton and Radstock. Our high streets were struggling even before COVID-19 struck them even harder. To introduce these charges would have a catastrophic effect on the Summer Valley and our high streets by disincentivizing residents from shopping local. This council is already making a right mess of parking charges in Bath, and I don't believe we should be importing these broken ideas onto the Summer Valley when we should be promoting high street renewal. I want to know why this is being proposed, and have the council any idea how much damage these income generations proposals will have on our community in the Summer Valley and on the local economy. Shopping local is an important part of acting on the climate emergency, but this seems to fly in the face of that, and I think it should be scrapped.
Okay, thank you, Grant. 2 very clear questions. So if we take the garden waste question first, is that to go to you, Dave, initially?
Yes, happy to take the first stab at that, and I'm sure Richard can come in with any additional thoughts. So you'll see from thank you for the question, Grant, first of all. You'll see from the papers in front of you that £500,000 is going in this budget in investments in the curbside recycling collection service. The context here is years of underinvestment within this service that's left us fairly potential victim to COVID, to driver shortages resulting from Brexit. There's not been the resilience and staffing of that service to be able to overcome these logistical challenges. Quite in common with other local authorities as well. So we talk about the garden waste collection service, where there were a couple of problematic weeks in last year, as Grant mentioned. In other neighbouring authorities, they had to stand down their garden collection service entirely for weeks and months at an end. So I'm proud of the way that our service has been able to respond to these challenges and insulate our residents from them compared to other authorities. But that's not to say that we shouldn't start to go about reversing the lack of investment into this service. So we have £500,000 going in to provide extra staffing, additional loaders, to incentivise drivers to work for us, so that we can have the resilience in that service to provide it in the long term. Additional income from garden waste collections only amounts to a relatively small, around half of that additional investment we're putting into the service. And you'll see that we're needing to invest further in that garden waste collection service in order to account for the additional subscribers to it. So I think it's good news that more people are subscribing to the garden waste collection service, that our service held up much better than those in other local authorities, but that we're recognising that a large number of years of underinvestment in that service has taken place, and we're investing a further £500,000 to make it more resilient for the long term.
Okay, and then is it Richard? Are you going to respond to the question more about car parking?
Yes, I will. Yeah.
Thank you.
But first of all, I'll just pick up the point Grant made about whether the savings are realistic or not. I can assure you they absolutely are realistic. We have been going through a very rigorous process since November of going through every single savings that was proposed by portfolio holders and directors. And where we do not think, or where we did not think that the saving was achievable, it has been removed. So what remains are the savings that, in the opinion of the directors, their portfolio holders, and the finance team who have verified the workings, is that all of those savings are deliverable within the financial year that we're proposing. So I'm afraid I don't agree with your assertion that this budget is not realistic. It is absolutely realistic. On the question of car parking charges, well, when I introduced the item, I referred to the 3 charging areas where the council raises income to provide its services, and parking is one of those. So the council gets £4 to £5 million a year from its parking charges across Bath and North East Somerset. Now, the specific issue of the Somer Valley and Midsummer Norton and car parking charges being introduced there is that they are free at the moment. And the feedback that comes back to the economic development team is that businesses in those towns find that there are many residents who park, because it's free at the moment, park all day, block spaces, and actually the very thing that businesses want, which is regular turnover in car parks, is reduced. So there is a charge being introduced. It's very modest compared with the charges in Bath, and which are much higher because the demand is much higher, and it will raise income. And the challenge back to you all on the panel is to say, well, that's fine. We can all go through these proposals and take things out, but the budget has to balance. And if you take it out from one area, it's got to be found in another. And the challenge would be, which area is it that you would take out? So I think the introduction of these charges is proportionate. I know it won't be popular. Raising parking charges never is. Now, the other thing I wanted to just comment on, I'm not sure what you meant by this, when you described what I think the words you used were the mess in Bath. And I'm not sure what you mean by that. If you are referring to the misplaced local publicity on the introduction of Sunday charges, or effectively that's what they mean, because what the council has done is to, in many areas of the city now, remove free parking on a Sunday from single yellow lines. And that's the issue. And of course, there were photographs in the local media showing rows of cars with what they thought were tickets on, but actually what they were warnings to those people parking there that there would be charges being introduced, and those have come in from the beginning of January, which I think is quite a fair way to approach this. But there is a climate emergency point underneath this. When people effectively now, I'm afraid, Sundays are just an extension of the week, and shopping and so on takes place on a Sunday much as it does any other day of the week. What happens every Sunday, or has been, is that people stream into Bath, they know where all the free parking is on single yellow lines, and they park there. And what this is designed to do is, first of all, discourage that by encouraging people to use the park and rides, or to use the council's own car parks or on-street parking. But they have to pay for it. And that is the big change that has come in. So, you know, it's not really a mess. It's not popular. We know that when you introduce car parking charges, it's never popular with anybody who drives a car. But there are very good reasons for wanting to manage the traffic that comes into the city better. And as you know, as a resident who lives right in the centre of the city, Grant, I can tell you the roads up from the city centre to Camden, where I live, are absolutely rammed with vehicles on a Sunday who are parking to avoid charges. And I'm afraid the council's financial position is such that we now have to consider those charges, and that's why they have been introduced. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Richard. Lisa, you're next. If again, can we pick up both your questions if you've got to? Oh, are you on mute, Lisa?
Right, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, speak up and we'll all turn up our volumes as well.
Well, I could move in. I'm not sure whether this cancels it. Anyway, right. I've got two questions really, one about savings and one about expenditure. I was concerned to see a potential saving of £156,000 in terms of street lighting columns, changes to planned maintenance, etc., etc. One of the reasons I'm particularly concerned about this is that when in the summer last we passed unanimously a motion to improve women's safety, one of the big issues that were raised by many of the female councillors was poor lighting. And so I'd like some more information on that aspect and a reassurance that it's not going to adversely affect the ability to mend street lights, improve them, etc. The other thing that I'd like reassurance on, and I was a little puzzled, that in terms of the climate emergency savings, you've identified savings of £73,000 on staff recharges. Well, why hasn't this happened previously? And surely if you're going to recharge from climate emergency budget into other budgets, surely this is just robbing Peter to pay Paul. So that's question one. And,
quite crafty there and snuck in two in one, but we'll go with it. Let's go.
And the other thing is really, I guess, to Sophie, in terms of, I was disappointed as a member of this panel that the projected funding is, well, it's about staffing, 91,000 to appoint extra staff, nothing specific to actually put money behind our initiative, and I'm very disappointed in that. So that's it.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, if we maybe pick up the street lighting point first of all, is that you, Dave?
It is, yes. Thanks very much for the question, Lisa. Absolutely happy to give you that solid assurance there'll be no reduction in service in terms of fixing street lights and street light columns as well. Two points to make here. First, in terms of replacement of street light columns, that is in no way related to replacing of lights and fixing of lights which are on top of those street light columns. So two separate issues there. Street lights need replacing usually after about 30 or 35 years, and there's a rolling program of replacement of old street lights. I'll follow that up with a slight apology on the wording of this line item, which we tried to correct in time for this paperwork going out, but didn't quite. It was mentioned, but wasn't quite made clear enough within it. The 156,000 is being assigned from revenue to capital. So actually no fewer streetlight columns will be repaired or replaced over the next year compared to the previous year. So that could have been made clearer in the paperwork that you received, but it's absolutely the case that there's no reduction in service there. And it's worth highlighting that we've got actually a really good track record in Bath and North East Somerset over many years, in fairness, that we do keep our stock of streetlight columns replaced on the regular basis that they call for, that kind of 30 to 35 year cycle. So it's one area where we are fairly ahead of the game.
Thank you, Dave. Oops. Sophie, are you the best person to then pick up Lisa's other 2 points around the climate emergency funding bits?
Yes, I'm happy to answer those. So you asked about why, if we're recharging people's time on the climate emergency and sustainable travel, why couldn't we have done that before? And isn't it just moving money around? So it's not moving money around the council's own budgets. This is recharging staff to capital projects that are funded by WECA, the West of England Combined Authority. And to some extent, we could have done it previously. There are some established ways you do capital recharges when their time is spent doing work that effectively helps to deliver a capital project. But you have to make assumptions about how much of their time. And after you've done it for a bit, you realize, oh, well, actually, they were spending 4 days a week, really, not 3 days a week on that project. So we've got a set of very conscientious staff who are very careful about how they record their time. And once we've recorded it for a bit, we're able then to work out we could have recharged some more. So we are trying to do that more so that we save our revenue money as a council for the staff that cannot be recharged. Your second question was, why is the only increase on climate emergency on another member of staff and not on anything else to address net zero? We have previously allocated funding as a council for net zero. So for example, we have a £500,000 a year renewable energy and a pot for the council to spend on renewable energy projects. So those exist still and are progressing. It's not that we've removed anything. The main thing that I've been focusing on is ensuring that the West of England Combined Authority is investing in net zero, and Councillor Warren has been negotiating with the West of England Combined Authority. There is now going to be a £30 million investment from the Combined Authority on climate emergency and ecological emergency, which is coming to the West of England committee meeting at the end of this month for agreement. So those additional funds are coming just from WECA, not from the council.
Thank you, Sophie. And I think, Dave, you're wanting to add a quick extra point?
Yes, yeah, just to sort of draw attention, there's that line around the restructure and saving around climate staff, but on the corresponding spreadsheet there was also an increase, a greater increase in staffing levels and climate staff that more than balances out that. So there's actually an additional investment in climate staff, in addition to what's coming through WECA as well. And I was glad that Sophie picked up on the point around the money going into renewables. I don't know if you've got a figure that you can put to that, Sophie, but I have seen one of the spreadsheets that had a fairly significant sum put towards renewables.
Okay, I think we'll probably come back to that, will we, Sophie, or have you got that number?
It's £500,000 a year on renewable energy.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, next on the list, I've got Ryan. Ryan, again, if you can do your 2 questions, that will be helpful.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Yes, the 2 questions I have are both in relation to appendix number 1, the proposed savings. So the first question, I just thought there wasn't quite enough information in the papers we have. So this is for the business and skills staffing budget. It says do not recruit a vacant post in the business and skills team. So I was wondering what post is that, and what's the potential impact of us delaying the recruitment for that post, and also how long are we going to delay the recruitment for? Because that will, the longer we delay, obviously, the more sort of impact there will be, really. And then the other question I had, something that did jump out at me as something potentially quite concerning, was the cuts to the dog warden service. So if I'm reading this correctly, we're going to cut this down to purely focus on stray collections. And when the dog warden is already something that gets quite a small amount of funding. Of course, we've only got one dog warden. And yeah, so I'm sure all the councillors here are aware of a lot of dog mess in our wards. And if this were to happen, there's quite likely going to be more dog mess. Is something I think the public really would notice. So I wondered if this cut does happen, what alternatively are we going to do to tackle dog mess? Yeah,
okay, thank you, Ryan. I'm guessing, Richard, you can pick up the business skills team points, and then Dave for the dog warden piece.
Actually, I'm hoping Sophie can pick up the business skills piece, because, but I can comment on the dog warden one. That's actually under Councillor Bull's portfolio, but I have removed it because he has told me that the saving that was advanced, it was a review of the service and how it's funded, that is not going to be possible to progress that within the next financial year. So I've agreed that it will be removed. We will still be reviewing the service to see if it can be made more effective. But if anything comes out of that, that will be in the 23-24 budget. So won't be anything in there this year. Okay. So if you able to pick up the business skills post? Thank you.
It's a reasonably junior post that was a support function for the team. It's sat empty for a while, and it's rated green. Just with discussion with the team leader of that team, she and I felt comfortable removing that post from the plans for the future. If I'd be happy to take away and get you more detail on what that post historically had done, if you would like that information.
That'd be really helpful. Thank you, Sophie. Great. If I then move us.
Sorry, Joe. Could I pick up the dog question? It's sort of slightly split between my portfolio and Tim's portfolio as well. So thanks for the question on the dog warden. Obviously, what Richard said around this review is not happening this year, but we are investing further in dog fouling enforcement. So you'll see elsewhere on the you won't see it in this budget, but in the investments in neighbourhood services, which is built into the base of this budget that was reported to Cabinet last year, we are increasing the amount of enforcement capacity to ensure that we have the capacity to enforce dog fouling as an issue that comes up in my area. I know that it comes up in your area as well, Ryan, and really all across the piece. So we are increasing our capacity to be able to enforce dog fouling within the coming year, in addition to this service review not taking place. And I'll be putting out communications to councillors, ward councillors, as we go into the new financial year to talk about how you can best utilise that dog fouling enforcement service.
Okay, that clears that one up. Moving on, I've got Shelley next on the list.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Hi. I think these two questions are for you, Dave. Actually, they're from Appendix 2, the neighbourhood services. So, the first question is that what is the landfill tax, and just connected to that, is that included in council tax? And then the second question was connected with the green waste demand. Why is it assumed that there'll be an increase in green waste demand? Is that linked to demographic changes, really? Yeah. So those are my two questions. Thanks, Dave.
Just put myself on mute in between questions. So taking the second one first. So we have seen a big increase in the people subscribing to the green waste collection service, and that's definitely an upward trend at the moment, which I think is a good endorsement of the overall success of that scheme. So that does mean increased income, but it also means increased investment is required in that service to make sure that it can collect at capacity across the authority. In terms of the, I'll just find the landfill tax. Yes, so I'm not too across the specifics of this 7K item, actually, so I might need to see if Chris has got any information on that one, or otherwise if Chris hasn't, we can get something in writing to you within 5 days.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't got the detail on that particular item, so we'll come back to you. If that's okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm just quickly looking at Hal's comment that he has to leave at 5. I think Ruth was next. Ruth, do you object if we jump Hal above you on the questions? No, so Hal, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, Hal.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd really like to almost repeat the question that I asked last week at the corporate scrutiny, is that if we just look down here and we just see £117,000 extra being spent, it doesn't look very much on something that is one of our crucial areas that we should be committing ourselves to. And so I really asked Richard if it was possible to pull together some of the other key items that are there in the capital funds. And I think we agreed one last week was the Pixash Lane, that in actual fact is important, because it just seems to me that we could be accused that we're just not doing enough on this area in the budget.
Thank you, Hal. Who wants to pick that up? Is that one for you, Sophie, or Richard?
I think Councillor Wood might want to talk about that.
He may well do.
Can I just say to panel members that we're bringing, Councillor Warren is bringing the climate action plan, so the report on the last year's work on climate emergency and the next year's work on climate emergency on Monday to the panel next week. So I think effectively that will be the list that you're asking for.
Okay.
Oh, thank you, Sophie. I've not got to the reading for next week, so that's really helpful as a signpost. Okay, Dave, were you wanting to add anything extra? Have we lost Dave? Is he on mute?
I think he's on mute.
Okay, Dave, you're on mute.
But the camera's off as well, so he might just be away for a minute or have just lost connection. Oh, no.
Sorry, yeah, my connection went a bit shaky there. Sorry. Could you repeat the question? I missed the question as well.
Really, I was just asking that we need to have, if you like, a package that we can explain to people that we are making a significant, meaningful contribution to climate change in this budget. Because if they just look at Appendix 2, it looks like 117,000 out of 136 million, which doesn't look very much. And what I heard from Sophie was that we're gambling on getting money from WECA, whereas I believe we're doing a lot more tangibly for climate change. And I did pick out the Pixash Lane building as part of that.
Yes, yeah, no, so it's a really good point and kind of a presentational point there, which I think is quite well made, and I think probably Richard will pick up the presentational point about how we do this. But I think the point that it underlines is that we don't see climate action as a discrete activity in this council. There's just the responsibility of one team. Climate action pervades, is the green thread that runs through the entire council and everything we do. So actually every service in every area is contributing towards our climate action in some way, and that's the way it should be. That it sits across all service areas. It isn't just the responsibility of one team or one person. But I think it's a point well made, and we should make efforts to draw all those things that the council is doing, huge range of things that are climate focused, and draw them all together into one place so the public can see this is what we're doing on climate action right across the council.
Thank you, Dave. And you probably missed the comment from Sophie that this will be actually one of the key agenda items next week at the panel. Okay.
All right, yes, yeah. And just to add, I was just checking my notes on landfill tax, because I knew I'd been briefed, and so I just went through my notes to answer Councillor Shelley's question. So demographic changes. So government do levy various taxes related to waste and recycling, and we're expecting increased tax just because the number of new houses that are being built across the authority. So that's that 7K item.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. You've been very patient. Do you want to get your two questions in?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Yeah, I have a one more sort of general question and one more specific. So the specific one was just one of the points in the first appendix. Reduce Springs maintenance budget by £17,000, I think, which is perhaps not such a huge amount, but I would just like to know a bit more about that, what that means and why it's being reduced. But the more important, perhaps, overall question is to do with the draft budget assumption about inflation, because it's down here is on our papers as 2%, but as far as I know, recently, November of last year, it was already over 5%. So could you explain what steps you're taking to make sure that the council doesn't get caught out with, extra costs that way? Thank you.
Who wants to pick up, was it spring maintenance as the first point, which I'm hoping will be quite quick? Ooh, everyone's looking blank at me.
I missed what Ruth said. Spring maintenance, was that? I missed.
Yeah, it's down as under the planning portfolio actually, but Spring's maintenance budget. It's in the same section as the dog warden service. So I don't know. Perhaps I think.
Is that something we need to get someone to come back to us on?
Yeah, I'm just interested. I think it's Chris Major's name is alongside it, but.
Yeah, thank you for
that.
If
Chris can help.
Yes, absolutely. I can give some detail to it. So this is the work we do to maintain the water purity and safety through the natural springs that we have going into the buildings and the Thermae Spa, for example. So we've done some work across the piece to look how we deliver that service, and we think that we can have a slight reduction in the budget to deliver that service. So this is about water quality within those buildings. So it's about making sure that we can deliver that service to the partners whilst slightly reducing the budget cost.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And Richard, do you want to pick up the piece about inflation and the crystal ball gazing? Yeah.
So Ruth is quite right. There is a lower inflation figure penciled in than the headlines that are coming out of the Bank of England. So the Bank of England is projecting forward forward inflation rises possibly as high as 6%. Some of those haven't hit the decks yet. Their forecast is quite medium to long term. The government data is all backward looking. So it looks back at published inflation figures, which probably until September last year were running between 2% and 3%. But as I said in the introduction, what is feeding into the national picture now is increases in wages because of shortage of labour right across the economy. Energy prices, well, of course, all of us know that there is a massive hike in energy prices on the way. I mentioned construction costs, but also more generally, all commodity costs right across the economy are rising. So the council is exposed to all of this. The issue in terms of the budget is what is a reasonable level to pitch at. And I think when you see the final budget report next month, what will be highlighted is the risk in the budget of inflation galloping away at the levels that the Bank of England thinks might happen. If that happens during the next financial year, it's not likely to happen from 1st of April, but it could feed through the year. If we face higher levels of inflation, then we will have to manage that through the year. And we'll have to manage that by in-year economies if necessary. But it's not practical for the council to budget at a level of 5% plus for inflation, because even if we're able to, you'd all be looking at huge council tax rises for residents. And Councillor Johnson made the fair point that that's actually probably the last thing people want to see at the moment. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but we think 2%, which is an average, some areas will be higher, some will be lower, is a reasonable working assumption. But it is a tightrope, I admit that, and it will be contained in the risks highlighted in the budget.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, I was going to try and squeeze in my 2 quick questions, but I don't need big answers. My first question was about parking enforcement officers, and that there appeared to be a reduction in the budget there. I just wanted to kind of understand the consequences of that, and is there a risk that we're cutting off our noses to spite ourselves and losing income by doing that? And then my second question was around the very excited about the investment in the cycling and walking infrastructure, and my question is really about how quickly we can bring that on stream. And so I'm guessing the parking enforcement is that. Chris, are you the best person to pick that one up?
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, appreciate the question. It's always a really difficult balance with parking enforcement. As we know from the state of the national market with these types of roles, they're really difficult to fill. And for a number of years, we've maintained a FTE, full-time equivalent establishment of more staff than we can ever recruit for the service. So what we're proposing is that we would slightly reduce the establishment, but still actively seek to recruit post the numbers we need to deliver the service across the city and the wider rural areas. It is a balance, but it's about looking at how we are delivering the recruitment, how we deliver the retention of the staff we have in post to make sure that we can do it. And it also links through to the item where we're looking to review the hours of work the staff are currently doing to make sure that we have the right staff in the right place on the right days of the week as we go through. So it's about more of a redesign of the offer we give to keep the staff and to recruit to a level that's appropriate for the service.
Thank you. And Sophie, can you pick up my question about the cycling infrastructure and walking infrastructure? Oh, have we lost Sophie?
Yes, I think Sophie said she had to leave at 5, so she's just left.
All right, Chris, is that something you can touch on, or is it something I can follow up later?
Sorry, I missed the question. I was focusing on the other one. I do apologise.
Well, I'm excited to see the investment in the infrastructure, and I'm just keen to understand how quickly we can bring it on stream.
So there's a number of programs of work that we're bringing forward, and we will go through the normal consultation processes with the public to bring those schemes going forward. So they are within the budget and the delivery program for 22-23. So we'll expect to see that go through throughout the calendar year. The delivery element of it would then be in the later quarters of that financial year.
Thank you. Okay. You've all been very patient on that, and I appreciate the full team's input on quite wide-ranging questions, so much appreciated. I plan to move us on to the next agenda item, if everyone's happy with that, which is the council house building programme. So thank you to Graham, who's been waiting patiently, and also to Tom, who I think is there somewhere. Yeah, there you are, Tom.
I am, yeah. Hi, Chair.
Yeah. So shall I start? Are we starting with Graham and then moving on to Tom? Is that right?
I think Graham and I thought the other way around. We thought I might do a very quick introduction to the paper, and then Graham and I will sort of tag team our way through the questions, if that's okay.
All right, the floor is yours, Tom.
Well, it's only briefly, but thanks, Chair. Everyone, you've all had the paper in front of you on our council house building update. It was I was sitting on this on the scrutiny panel when the first paper on our aspirations as an administration on council house building came to this panel previously, because you know I joined the cabinet in May last year to lead specifically on this element of our work with council house building. And I'm really delighted to present this paper today, which obviously follows on from the paper that we took to cabinet in November, and which of course forms, I think, the largest single item of capital investment in the budget paper that my colleagues have just been talking through in the previous item. The paper in front of you, I think, paints a really important picture of not only what work, the significant work that the council has done in its enabling role and working with registered providers and housing associations over the last 10 years and trying to support the delivery of affordable homes, But it also, and it's been very successful, over 1,900 affordable homes have been delivered in the last 10 years. But I think what the paper also sets out is the very stark issue that we face in our area. We have over 6,000 households on our social housing waiting list. And what we were determined to do as an administration was for the council itself to play a direct delivery role in council houses. And what this paper does is present the first set of council houses for social rent for a generation. That's what is now approved, signed off by the cabinet and included within the budget for next year. To date, we've focused as an administration on principally the supported housing schemes, and you'll see that in 3.6 we highlight 4 schemes. I think it is 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 4 schemes providing supported housing, which are in the process of being delivered or are already delivered. And what the November paper was about that went to cabinet is the delivery of general needs council housing. And in that paper, we announced the delivery of or the approval of the first phase of general needs council housing, which consisted of 58 units of general needs council housing. As the financial section of the paper highlights, this programme is revenue neutral. It also, as you'll see under the climate change, and just picking up on that point that Councillor Wood made, that tackling the climate and ecological emergency is the thread that needs to run through everything that we do as a council. And under the climate change section in the report, we just highlight not only a statement about the standards to which all of these properties will be delivered, but already actually under 8.2, highlighting some examples of where success has already been achieved in relation to meeting our obligations under the climate emergency with the programmes that are coming under this council house building paper. I will finish before I go back to sort of highlighting what we wanted to ask for the committee. I'll finish by saying I cannot stress enough how much work our area faces in tackling the needs for housing in our area, and in particular in social housing. We have one of the least affordable areas in the country for housing. And what we set out here is the phase 1 of what will subsequently be many phases of the council playing a direct delivery role in the provision of social housing in our area. And so I'm really proud to present this paper. I'm incredibly grateful to Graham and his colleagues who worked so hard to introduce this new work stream, and obviously for getting it included in the budget with Councillor Samuel. And as we've said under the recommendation, what we're bringing this paper here today is to ask the panel to note the current progress on meeting our manifesto commitment to deliver council housing, and to provide an initial view on the direction of travel and other matters of principle the panel considers appropriate in your consideration of the paper. Graham, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to highlight now before we tackle questions specifically. I know that Councillor O'Brien sent us some questions in advance.
I think that's a really good and comprehensive introduction to the paper, actually. So for me, as Tom's articulated, we've made really good progress over the last 10 years or so. We've delivered around, almost, or by the end of this year, it will be almost 2,000 affordable houses, which is great. But what we're all really acutely aware of is there's still huge demand and pressure on residents for housing in the district, particularly social housing. So for me, this is very much this paper, and the work we've been doing so far is very much about how we corporately can add value, how we can use our resources and skills and assets to try and plug gaps where there are gaps. So particularly around the supported housing, there's very much market failure around that. So we've been able to make some inroads and provide accommodation for former rough sleepers which has been really very positive. We're also providing some increased resilience around temporary accommodation. So that's about market failure and us helping around there. And then in relation to the general needs, it's about us trying to get some additionality on some of our smaller sites, which we have. As I'm sure you know, in planning terms, generally we only get affordable housing coming forward on the larger sites, and certainly only if there's more than 10 units. So sometimes that means some of the smaller sites can slip through, and this is just a way of getting some of those sites to deliver for us. So I think this is really positive, I think, and it allows us not to, as the paper mentions, not to compete with our registered provider partners, but actually work in partnership with them. So that's probably the introduction, the context I'd like to just reinforce. I know I have some questions which Councillor Bryan had raised. Now, it might be sensible if I try to address those now, if you're happy with that.
If we do that, and then if we then come on to Grant's question after that, that would be great. Okay, so is it worth going to Lisa initially just to remind us what those questions were?
Oh, if you're happy, Lisa, I have them in front of me, so I can paraphrase them for you if you like. So Lisa asked 3 questions. One was about the specifics of the sites and the valuations of the sites. When we introduce the sites in the second question is around the financing, and then the final question is around right to buy receipts, which I'll cover all of those. But the first question was about the sites, if we can release the site details and any valuations. When we produced the cabinet report, actually we made a decision that the site should remain exempt information at this stage. That said, what we did say was that once we start to construct viable schemes and are approaching planning permission, then we can release that information. And we have actually now, we can release information on 2 of the schemes now. So the first two schemes are going to be at 117 Newbridge. So if you recall, that was a scheme which previously had been earmarked for part market sales, part shared ownership. Actually, the decision now is to convert that entirely into social rent. Not only that, but we think we can increase the capacity of the scheme. So it was originally scheduled for 6 units. We can now deliver 7 units of social rented accommodation, in much needed accommodation in Newbridge, which is a great location for us to be able to deliver some social rent. The second scheme is on Argyle Works. So this is a small former council yard on Lower Bristol Road, which has been deemed surplus and will very shortly be vacated. And in the next few weeks, we hope to put planning permission in for that scheme, which would be 8 units of accommodation. Again, very central, great location. The other remaining 6 sites, what we said previously at Cabinet, and this still holds true, is if you want that information on a one-to-one basis, we're very happy to provide that. And after this meeting, Councillor Bryan, if you want, we can arrange a meeting and I can show you the list of the remaining 6 sites. The second question you raised was around the revenue costs, and you effectively posed a question about there's £661,000 in a budget uplift on the previous paper you saw around corporate estates. And I suppose I think there may have been a slight bit of confusion on this point. So the council house building programme is constructed as revenue neutral. And effectively what we mean by that is we charge rents and the rents go to pay for the management. Now, clearly the rents don't, the rents cover more than just the management, and the surplus then goes to effectively pay off the borrowing. But going forward, there is no revenue impact on this scheme. There's a capital impact up front, but no ongoing revenue impacts. The figure you quoted was 661,000, and I think, and I may be making a mistake here, but I wonder whether it may be the budget line which related corporate estates budget uplift. And if it is, that's an entirely separate budget uplift. So that's a budget uplift by, I think it may be Chris Major and his teams, which are looking to enhance the repairs and maintenance improvements in relation to our existing corporate estate, Guildhall, Civic Centre, and the other buildings we own. So it's not related to this proposal or the council house building programme. And the third question was related to right to buy receipts and how much we've received. So as of the beginning of this year, we had a carry forward of 2.5 million or thereabouts in right to buy receipts. We haven't yet had the right to buy receipt for this year, but we anticipate that is going to be in the order of 1.2, 1.3 million. So hopefully that provides answers to your questions, but I'm sure you'll come back to me if you need any clarification on that.
Thank you, and thank you to Lisa for submitting questions, which does make officers' roles in this, in being able to prepare answers, just run more smoothly. Lisa, before we move, is there anything else you wanted to clarify before we move on to grants?
Well, I thank you, Graham, for that explanation. However, I am still not comfortable with the statement that Tom made that these were going to be revenue neutral. You mentioned Newbridge. There is a cost to Baines for the asset of the land and in some cases the building. So you haven't really answered that one yet. So we'll have to get back on that one. The other thing in relation to revenue, so-called revenue neutral costs, in 3.7, you identify that the council is going to be responsible for commissioning all aspects of the delivery, etc., etc., etc. Now that means, and you also identify in 3.8 that you're going to develop in-house skills and competence. So what I want to find out is if you're going to, the council is going to oversee the design and construction of these properties of this program, are you going to recruit new people to do that, or are you going to use expensive consultants? Either way, there has to be an on cost to building this program. And so I appreciate your explanation, Graham, but I'm sorry, I still don't quite buy it. Thank you.
That's perfectly understandable. And if it's okay if I come back on that, absolutely right. There are on costs. So I suppose it's a little bit accounting terminology, really. So there are absolutely on costs. They are in part will be filled by council employees. So there is some additional work for us, and there will be some appointments made. And I think there's reference to one in the original cabinet paper. And there also will be consultancy costs. So, for example, planning consultants, architects, that type of thing. So it is a combination of both. So there are those on costs. I suppose for us, what I was trying to articulate is those on costs are wrapped up in the capital. So when I refer to the cost of the scheme is around £12 million, the 58 units, those costs, those on costs, are included in that £12 million. But they are one-off costs. So once the schemes are up and running and there is an ongoing revenue cost, repairs, maintenance, rent collection, those type of things, they are all included and paid for by the rents.
That's really helpful. I suspect this will continue the conversation. Tom, are you wanting?
Well, I only just wanted to pick up on that last point as well, and that's there is a piece of work going on at the moment about what the most effective way of delivering the management and maintenance and sort of revenue collection services are. There will come a critical point in our programme, because this will eventually be a programme of many hundreds, thousands of council houses for social rent. There will come a point in that where there's a critical mass where it may be deemed appropriate for the council to develop its own management and maintenance team in-house. There may be a time when before that we may look to use a third-party provider with whom we'll engage. And that's a piece of work that was highlighted in the Cabinet report that we need to, that's ongoing at the moment, just as we work up the timings and the delivery of the Council House programme. But that's all to do with the, as Graham was saying, to do with the revenue side of this, the actual sort of day-to-day management of this, what will be a significant portfolio of council houses.
Okay, thank you. We might come back to that. I'm conscious Grant wanted to be first out the gate, so over to you, Grant.
I was just being pre-prepared. So thank you for explaining what you explained earlier. I absolutely welcome this paper on council house building, and I think it's a really important step for us to provide decent social housing through council house building once again as a council. So that is brilliant. However, the scale of our ambition and aspirations, as Tom put it, doesn't appear to me to go enough. And as the report makes light of, we only currently have we currently have 600 properties becoming available each year, when 6,000 households are on the social housing waiting list. So, I mean, how does the council think this very limited amount of council house building is going to have the substantial impact required to bring down the waiting list for social housing? And was there scope to go further?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I just can't wait to dive in and answer that.
That was sort of one, I think. I'm trying to get away with that being one question. I just said you mentioned no ongoing revenue impact, but I'm slightly worried that we don't have a clear plan for how these properties are going to be managed. Can you give some further context on this issue and why we don't have a plan?
Okay. So shall we pick up the ambition piece first?
Graham, are you happy if I go first?
Absolutely, Tom, you go first.
Graham, I cannot stress how much I would concur with what you're saying about the sense of need that you highlighted. I stressed it in my introduction. What I think is important to tell, and I have to be careful here because I can't absolutely confirm this, but I think these are certainly the first general needs council houses that we've done for a generation, 20, 25 years. I think, although I can't be 100% sure, these are actually the first general needs council houses that Bath and North East Somerset as a council has ever done. And so what essentially we are doing today, and what we did by getting this approved by Cabinet, is introducing a work stream for a service for the very first time that this council is doing. It's the very first time I think that this council is doing this. Certainly the first time for 25 years. And so what we needed to do with regards to starting to become a provider in social housing is phase one, which is sort of get ourselves up and running as we are now a registered provider, but now this is phase one to get ourselves up and running in delivering general needs council houses. What I am now working on with officers, and we'll have more information as this year goes on, is our medium to long-term strategy with the council itself delivering what will be many hundreds and eventually several thousand, I hope, council houses. This is the scale of the ambition is there, trust me. What we're trying to do now is sort of proof of concept, get us up and running as a provider for these council houses, but knowing full well, and that's why we included it in the paper, know full well what the scale of need is. In a generation's time, I want people to be looking at us and saying, we, along with some of the housing associations, are a lead provider of social housing in our area.
Okay, and then Graham, are you picking up then the piece around the clear plan around management?
Yeah, I'm very happy to pick that one up. So I think we need to see this as a journey, and actually Tom is correct. This is the first time we've done this. So certainly since Baines was formulated. We do have a plan, but we haven't made a decision yet. There is a difference there. So we have a plan, and the plan is effectively we need to make a decision. We understand some of the pros and cons, but effectively we're faced with two choices. We can either directly manage the housing stock. Yep. Now, clearly, there's benefits of that. It keeps it, very close to us. We gain knowledge, we gain experience, but also there's a downside to that. It can be very costly. It can be risky. If like anything, when you're starting new, and actually, it's really important that we look at it from a customer and resident's point of view. So what's best for them? But there is that option, and then the other option, of course, is that we could commission, effectively outsource the management, and we could outsource it to somebody, a tried and tested organisation who's already doing this. So typically another registered provider who may or may not be operating in a district. And, that's another option. And again, there's pros and cons to that. There's also the scale aspect, and this goes back to the journey. So the decision we may want to make in the next few months may not be the same decision we want to make in a few years' time. It's clearly different making a decision as to what you do with the management when you have 50, 60 units to when you have hundreds of units. So it's not that we don't have a plan. We absolutely do have a plan, but what we haven't yet made is that decision. And that's a decision which we need to make over the next in the next few months.
And just to elaborate on the finances of that, we've obviously used, as the report says, we've used typical industry standards to cost up what these services would cost. So therefore, theoretically, it doesn't matter which route you go down; it's factored into the finances.
Thank you. And we move on to questions from Shelley. Or Councillor Bromley, as I should probably say.
Thank you for your presentation, Tom and Graham. Just a couple of questions here. You talked about the six, and Grant was talking about the Councillor Johnson was talking about the 6,000 waiting list. I just wondered on average how long people are on that waiting list, and if it's mostly families. I don't know if you have that information. And do you want me to go on to the second question now, or do you want to
let's do that as well, please, Shelley.
Okay, Chair, go for it. And the second was these 593 affordable housing units which have planning consent. I just wondered, are they spread all over Baines, or are they mostly in Bath city centre, city really? Thank you.
Graham, can you pick up both of those?
I will try to. So the 6,000 people on the waiting list. So we have around, sorry, it's not people, I need to be clear on that, it's 6,000 households on the waiting list. So 6,000 households on the waiting list, 600 properties or thereabouts becoming vacant each year. Clearly, we can do the maths, and that means if you're an average person, you're waiting 10 years on the list to be housed. But there is no such thing as an average person or average household on the waiting list. So clearly, we prioritise households. We prioritise them in broadly three groups, Group A, B and C. Group A is people who have an urgent need to move. Group B is people who have a need to move, and then Group C are people who would like to move but don't necessarily have a real demanding reason to move. If you're in Group A, you tend to be waiting around, and it does vary, and it depends where you want to move to and the size of the property. But you tend to be looking probably between 6 months and a year, that sort of order. Although I'm sure there'll be still people who are in Group A who've been waiting longer than that. But there is also people in Group A who move quicker than that. But that's a useful thing. If you're in Group C, you can be looking many years. Easily 10 plus years. It very much depends upon where you want to move to and what size accommodation. As for the makeup, I don't have that off the top of my head, but broadly speaking, we have, when I last looked, it was almost about a third of the people required 1-bed accommodation. Then I think it was 2-bed was the next most popular accommodation. And then the smallest number of people who wanted 4-bed, but ironically enough, 4-bed are the people, 4-bed plus are the people who have to wait the longest, because we have hardly any 4 beds and 5 beds becoming vacant. So, but if you'd like more information, just do drop me an email, and I can, it's very easy for us just to run the database and get you that information. In relation to the second question, I'm going to have to be really brief on that one and simply say, I don't know. So that's a figure which planning produce, and that's the number of extension planning applications. Where they're located, I couldn't tell you, I'm afraid.
Okay, great. Thanks. I might try and sneak in my questions, because I don't think we've got any other speakers at the moment flagged. So in terms of the kind of just building on the ambition piece, which I think Grant had kicked off, when do you think we'll have a paper coming forward with the medium and long-term strategy with sort of the ambition and articulated in numbers, is my first question. And then my second question, in terms of then the second piece about those 2 options and the decision coming in the next 2 or 3 months, I guess it's more of a comment here is that I would want to be persuaded quite strongly that outsourcing is the way to go. My gut feeling is that unless it's really prohibitive, the costs, that we should be trying to be looking at how we start to generate that expertise in-house. Yeah, I'll let you two kind of pick those up as you see fit.
We're hoping to have a paper in the next few months, which will set out some of our longer term aspirations. It may not be down to numbers, but it will certainly be given a clear direction of travel. And it seems sensible to incorporate that with a decision as to how we move forward on the management. I would push back slightly though, and would say, I think for us, it's very much about, this is providing a service, and one of the things we do need to think about is from a client's point of view. So that is something I think we need to factor into our decision when thinking about the management of it. We're all really very keen and excited to go forward on this, and rightly so. But what's really important is that we provide and ensure we provide an excellent service for those customers and those residents.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not seeing any further speakers. Is there anyone who wants to have? Oh, Ruth, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. That was very interesting to read. I was just wondering, are you sort of in contact with other local authorities to see, in similar situations, what they're doing, in particular thinking about this future management company that the council may put up? Is there any possibility of a sort of partnership with other local authorities in the future, do you think, if they're also doing this kind of work?
I think that's a really interesting question, actually. And certainly we have ad hoc conversations with, that I meet with other professionals, and I also speak to my sort of counterparts in the neighbouring authorities. So we keep abreast on what other authorities are doing. In relation to the future, I think that's really open, and that's the big question at the moment. So, as both Tom and myself said, this is a journey, and we're just leaving the station at the moment, and that's what we need to package ourselves in regard to. Once we start that journey, and once we have a better understanding of quantums and numbers and when they're coming on, well, that's an entirely different conversation, and it may well be that actually, we have conversations about partnering with other people on that. And just because of the scale, looking forward, there are some quite significant sites at scale, which may come online in the next few years. And then we may want to do these differently. We can manage doing a program of 58 units. When you're talking about hundreds, well, maybe we need to think about something different then.
Great. I'm not seeing anybody else indicating. No. So thank you, Tom and Graham, for your time and your detail, as always. And we kind of look forward to the next iteration in the next couple of months. So thank you both. Great. So I think we're then moving on to the work plan, item 9. I think it's there for us to note, and in particular, if people have got comments on the work plan or ideas about what should be going on it. Grant, you're flagging. Go ahead.
I've got a couple of points. One is I was just wondering if we would be we're having a big investment in the waste services, and I'm just wondering if that's going to come before us in greater detail.
I think it is. I think we've still got Dave on the line. Do you want to just answer that?
Yes, absolutely. So happy to provide any more detail I'm not able to provide today. But essentially, there were two particular investments in waste services listed in the budget: a 350,000 investment, and then sort of nearly £150,000 investment in drivers. So £350,000 investment is recognising that in many local authorities, recycling crews are a 3-person crew, and this is pretty desirable from the point of view that it provides a little bit of slack in the event of sickness, self-isolation and so on, but it also allows drivers to act as supervisors, to be able to help direct people to go to the right houses, to operate the in-cab technology. We're in the process of introducing into our cabs to make sure there aren't missed collections and that kind of thing. Historically, in Bath and North East Somerset, we've only had 2-person crews operating, which means there hasn't been very much flex within that system, and it's in periods of sort of COVID and bad health and so on. If there aren't enough agency drivers available, then we simply haven't been able to operate the service in quite the way that we would do. But actually, COVID aside, a 3-person crew is desirable in terms of capacity of our service, in terms of being able to reduce missed collections and so on. So 350,000 was principally to employ 13 additional loaders to move up most of our recycling rounds onto 3-person crews, expand the staffing in the system to be able to provide a better service. For the other amount, which is around driver retention, a scheme was put in place for financial incentives for drivers to stay with the council and for other drivers to come on board, and to allow us to operate a loader to driver learning route for staff. As we're all aware, there's a national shortage of drivers. So one of the things that we did was to employ people to start as loaders, but then train them up to be drivers as well, so that we can create our own supply of drivers. But happy to get you more detail on that incentivization scheme if that's needed.
And I think looking at the forward plan, we've got waste centres with an unscheduled timeline. Are you any clearer about when that can be brought back to the committee or the panel?
Yes, that's a good question. Actually, I'll take that one away and establish when the right timing is for that to come back to the panel. It's a good point.
Okay. Grant.
I just had one other thing, and the waste centres was the one I was referring to more so.
Oh, sorry, right.
But thank you for the good explanation there. The only other thing I wanted to bring up, and I thought this is the only relevant place to bring it up, is how we the meeting operates. I mean, we're an hour and 40 minutes in, yet we have this rules of 2 questions, and I'm not aware of any other scrutiny panels having these rules, and I think they were introduced off the back of one individual at the meeting who is no longer a member. Can we just go back to what it used to be like? Because I think it worked quite well.
Michaela, you're flagging?
Yes, only just to give the background of that. The reason Councillor Walker brought in the 2 questions was just because we had that meeting a while back in the Guildhall where it overran, and we had to send, I think it was Catherine Brown off, and she'd been waiting all evening, and we ran a long way over. So that's why she brought that in, but I can raise it with her.
Yeah, we can pick it up, can't we, at agenda planning meeting. And it does, I guess it's a challenge because you just don't know. If we go to 3 questions each, for example, then we would be, I'm doing the maths on the meeting times, we would be past 6 o'clock.
I'm not saying I want to ask 3 questions. I'm just saying I just don't like the fact that we are restricted so much when someone only might have 1 and someone else might have 3 legitimate questions. I just think it's a bit it reduces the capacity of the meeting to be beneficial, you know, and do what it should do.
We'll pick that up in the minutes, and we'll pick that, then follow that through agenda planning as a conversation. Great. Are there any other comments about the forward plan that people want to pick up today? Oh, Lisa?
I would just like, to, for next week's meeting, I would suggest that the annual report from climate emergency came first, with the clean air zone, the quality data, the air quality data coming second, because I think that,
I was only just going to say, Kath asked me to put hers first because she wanted to. She had somebody joining that had to get away earlier. That's
okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for your time today, and apologies if I was a bit too informal. I should have been probably all calling you Councillor Hurst or the equivalent, but there we are. And look forward to. I thought Karen's chairing next week, but Michaela thinks maybe I might be in the hot seat again. So we'll find out next week. But thank you all for your time and your patience.